Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. We are Labour Tech. Our job is to put together politicians, policymakers, and experts to talk about. Great, thank you. Talk about policy, to bring together policy experts and politicians to talk about emerging technologies and their impact on our daily lives. Part of what we do here is event management. We do pamphlets. Our first one we released was on quantum computing and the fact that if the UK doesn't invest in it, and others do, we will be left well behind. Our second pamphlet, which was released with contributions from Airbus and others, was on the defence industry, where we worked with Roke, BAE and others to talk about how if the UK doesn't protect, invest and do more to enhance its defence industry with modern technology, and industry in the UK, we will be left behind again. And we need to be, if anything, where the West finds its latest technology and uses it to defend the freedom that we all love. Our next pamphlet, which is going to build on this event, will be on how to build a space industry that's fit for the future and one which we can all look for and look forward to living in. I'll leave you all now in the capable hands of our chair and founder, Lewis Bateman.
Thanks very much, Adam. I'd like to welcome everyone to this event on the space industry, kindly supported and sponsored by Airbus UK as well. Airbus invest a lot of money into the UK space industry and are employing, I think, at least well over 15,000 people. I think.
Not just in space.
Yes, across all of their divisions in the UK, and it's important that their voice is heard, especially when it comes to the space industry, as it is something which is key and vital to the future of not only our country's economic success but military safety as well. As I'm sure people will pick up on later, we're seeing the militarisation of space becoming an ever increasing issue in the UK and across Western Europe as well. So I'll keep my welcome short and sweet. Calvin, would you like to go first with an introduction?
Hello, my name's Calvin Bailey. I am the Labour Party member for Leyton and Wanstead. I'm on the Defence Select Committee and Southern Africa Trade Envoy. In the past, I spent 25 years in the Royal Air Force as a pilot, but also a senior officer involved in security policy and operations, and have quite a deep background in space.
Phil?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Phil Chambers. I'm CEO of a company called Orbex. So we're building a vertical launch space rocket in northern Scotland in Forres.
And Oriel?
Hello, my name's Oriel Petry. I am Airbus's head of group public affairs here in the UK, so across our three divisions: commercial, aerospace, Airbus Defence and Space, and also helicopters.
Cool. So I'd like to get to do quite quickly. So the first question I'm going to ask everyone on the panel is, what are the three biggest challenges facing the UK space industry right now, and how do we fix them? Phil, would you like to go first?
I can kick us off first, thanks. So obviously answer this from the point of view of Orbex being a small company. We're about 10 years old now. We employ 240 people. But relatively speaking, a small company, and the launch business is obviously a deep tech thing, right? You work on developing a launcher for 10 years, and all of that time you don't have any revenue until you launch the first one, or in fact, not even the first, right? You need to get some test launches under your belt. So I think the biggest, the first point I'd like to start with is access to capital, particularly for deep tech. Projects in Europe has been historically very, very difficult. When you compare to the funding environment in the US, there's obviously much deeper pocket investors that are prepared to take much bigger risks, and space companies have less problems raising money. I would say then when we look at that from a UK perspective, the UK on a sort of per capita basis invests much less in space than our European peers. I think 4 times less than France, 2 times less than Germany. But from both public and private, we're not where we need to be necessarily. I would say there are some green shoots though, in terms of bodies like British Business Bank, like the National Wealth Fund, which are now enabled with the rewritten industrial strategy, which now includes space launch to support businesses like ours, we hope, in the future. So I think that's point one, was really access to capital and really the government stepping in, being an anchor investor when private companies can't. We've obviously seen that with Orbex, and we're obviously very grateful to DSIP for having done that. I think the second point for me is really those long-term, anchor contracts really to get businesses started. So we've obviously seen historically space launch in the UK and for the MOD and for the government being procured from the US. And it would obviously be incredibly helpful to get the UK government or the MOD as an anchor customer for UK-based launches. And to, if we can do that, that would obviously really also help bring in private capital. So I think having visibility on what satellites are intended to be built over the next decade, how many of them, when they're going to launch, and really backing sovereign launch in the UK, I think would help. And I think the third one is really around skills and talent. Because of the UK sort of dropping out of Europa in the 70s, scrapping some of our early successes in space, we haven't got that kind of deep skills base, particularly in stuff like liquid propulsion that you find in countries like France and Germany. So I think making it easier to bring people over here, and also working on improving university courses in these types of disciplines.
Cool. Thanks, Phil. Oriel, would you like to go next?
Well, you're opening with a very easy question. 3 things to kind of solve our challenges in space. I mean, for us as the UK space prime, we've been doing military satellite communications in the UK for the last 50 years. We not only have capability in GEO, so the satellites that are 30,000 kilometres up in space, but also low Earth orbit with Surrey Satellites, which is a wholly-owned subsidiary of ours, and then on missions with the European Space Agency. And for us, those 3 areas go hand in glove. You need to have the sort of institutional exploratory stuff, you need to have the military, and you need to have the commercial to make a viable business. And I'd say if you wanted me to boil down 3 things that I think we need here, it comes down, for us at least, to clarity. And by that I mean clarity from the government, what it seeks to achieve here in space, which bits it wants to have sovereign capability over, which ones it's happy to partner with. Focus, and by that I mean an industrial strategy is fantastic, but you need to focus through the delivery and really make a difference. And then the last thing I'd say is partnership, and partnership not only with industry, because this is a very complicated sector. It is very complicated across the globe. I can't think of a single country where the state isn't pulling levers in space. So the partnership between government and industry, and then the partnership, but a very thoughtful partnership, where the UK wants to play with different nations. I think those would be the 3 things, all of which are quite difficult to deliver.
Thanks very much, Oriel. Calvin?
Procurement and scale up, I'd say leadership and Brexit. The UK space sector is made up mostly of lots of very small companies with very bright ideas, less than 10 employees in most of those companies. And the medium-sized companies themselves are also very small. And so the industry is really susceptible to the challenges that SMEs face within, let's call it the defence sector and procurement, and facing being able to raise capital and get commitments from government that allows them to scale up. And so that susceptibility is something that really needs to be addressed. The SDR gets after it in part. There's some pointers in the industrial strategy, but we're waiting for an investment plan for defence. And the fact that we're talking about the reliance on defence for the problem as a whole is a bit of an issue, because most of this should be pan-government, which comes on to my second point, is that it's almost a year ago that I sat with Ben, wherever he's gone, and Chris Barrington said to Chris, and it's a shame we haven't got one of the ministers here, said, look, if you don't hear this, because it's very, it is not obvious where leadership comes from in government. And if we don't cohere it, we'll be a year down the road and we won't have made any progress. And arguably, we've kind of gone backwards, because trying to tackle those government stovepipes when you've lowered the UK Space Agency out of existence, and within the military, you've seen a similar aggression in its prominence. And so as a result, I'm slightly depressed in a way, because I've got a sense that we've kind of moved backwards unless we can. So we really need people to pick up on that, and that's why these meetings are so important. Hopefully that is Al coming in, because then I can have at him again. And also the idea, so leadership, because the government need to take this seriously, and it would be really useful if ministers were here to listen to the specific challenges that's faced. But in all seriousness, like, this is a pan-government problem, and the best way that you address problems is you take people to the problem and not the problem to a department. And so for me, this needs to be centrally coordinated and cohered, probably in somewhere like the Cabinet Office, with some kind of champion and leadership, or just someone that cares. And then Brexit. We're the fourth largest member of ESA. We're the only one without a space agency. There's a real nervousness. We've been withdrawn for some programmes. There is a real nervousness about seeing UK seem to be benefiting from entering some of these programmes, particularly things like Iris. And we've kind of really got to, Europe's got to get over that, because we're in a fight. Like the former, what's her name, Boothroyd, has just come out today and said we're probably at war, because, and I'd love to chat to you about some of the activity that's happened within the UK. And if we're in the approaches to conflict, then we really need to take this seriously, and Europe, and that means Europe needs to stop putting the blockers in place that it is. And I can speak freely because I'm not in the government, and some of our European partners are. But we also need to recognise that some of our big companies are big British companies, and that is the likes of Airbus. We've got to be out front and championing, both of the companies that are on the panel here, and picking winners which don't just fly a British flag. And if we don't do that, then we might as well watch the business redistribute itself around the European Union at our own loss, and it will impact some of our incredible startups, because there won't be the enterprise there for it. So they're my big 3 points.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. And Al.
Hello.
That's true. That is very true, Kevin. That is very true.
Fair.
It is only fair. So the question we've asked Al is, what are the 3 biggest challenges facing the UK space industry, and how do we fix them?
Yeah, well, I think, and this may have been covered already, and I do apologise for being late. I spent 24 years in the military, same as Calvin, and I don't think between us that we've seen the world so fractious or indeed geopolitically unstable. And if I was to say to you 10 years ago that we had drones flying around the Red Sea sinking ships, that if we had biological chemical weapons used in the UK, that we had a war in Europe that was costing 5,000 casualties in some cases a day, that if we saw a change in the character of conflict where uncrewed systems now are causing more casualties than artillery for the first time since the First World War, that we see a militarization of the South China Seas at a scale that is sped up to almost exponential levels. And importantly, amongst all of that, we see the intervisibility of space being dominated by some actors who may not have the same moral and ethical views on the Western rules-based system as us. And that, unfortunately, is the reality. That whilst we've built a lot of our military capability to rely on space, that space is now being contested. And I think and you can see in the Strategic Defence Review, that we need to take space seriously. We need to accept that it will be a key component in our national security as we move forward. But secondly, also a critical component in communications, and indeed spreading, from my perspective, our Western, rules-based system across the world, because space can also do a huge amount of goodness in bringing people from less advantageous backgrounds into out of poverty and into the sort of Western economic system. So I think the two components. One is it's increasingly contested. The second is that we can do a huge amount by being an active participation in space. And I suppose thirdly, from a military perspective and from my role as the Armed Forces Minister, we need to integrate space and accept that if we don't, we may find ourselves at a disadvantage in a not so distant future.
Cool, thanks, Al. So we'll move on to the next question, which is, where can the UK further expand sovereign capabilities in space, and what can the government do to support the industry? I'll lead with Oriel, if you want to go first.
I mean, Minister, it's just great to hear you say those things. Am I allowed to be a little bit challenging?
100%.
Because actually it's quite difficult for industry to see some of that pulled through, either in the Strategic Defence Review or the Defence Industrial Strategy. And the bit that I said when I was challenged and said, what 3 things do we need? It is clarity, focus and partnership. And I think if we could get to somewhere where we've got clarity of where we want to be sovereign, focus on how we pull that through, and that has to be done in partnership with industry, but it also, as you say, needs to be done in partnership with our international allies. And of course, they are changing, as you say. So in terms of where we can develop more, I think one of the things, and you've got it here with Phil representing Orbex, you've got Spaceforge in the audience, and I'm sure others that I haven't spotted yet. You've got incredible capability in the UK in space technologies. I mean, really, still world-beating technology, but it is hampered in the way in which it's pulled through and how we realise the potential of that. And that's for the reasons that we've talked about before, and it sounds both a bit general and a bit vague, but it does come down, maybe to your point, Calvin, of this pull through across Whitehall. You know, you need to have the various bits of the machine, whether it's DCIT that's thinking about exploration and civil, or the Ministry of Defence that's thinking about military. You need the whole thing, or cyber coming into that. You need the whole thing to be pulled together. And I think what's frustrating for us as industry, I would argue both small and big, so this is the conversations we have with the many suppliers that we've got, 1,500 of which are SMEs, is just that clarity of exactly where we want to go. And it comes back to that, really. The capability is there. There just needs to be a North Star that we can point to, and then we can do some incredible things.
Thanks, Oriel. Phil, as the other industry person on the panel, would you want to go?
I would echo a lot of Oriel's points, to be honest. I think you summarised it really well. I mean, I think we would love to see clarity on what the government's priorities really are. And I mean, I had some great conversations with Minister Kyle when he was at DCIT and said, is sovereign launch a UK government policy? He says, well, I keep banging on about it and no one's told me to stop. I was like, yeah, but is it a policy? It's alluded to in a lot of the new documents. It's mentioned in the industrial strategy, it's mentioned in Defence Strategic Review, but, you're not really seeing Keir get up on stage and talk about it. I think that'd be great to have. And I think, that working across government, really visibility on kind of what missions are coming down the track, what capabilities the UK feels it needs to build in the next 10 to 20 years, and if they're classified, then sharing some of those with industry partners actually, so we can get ahead of the curve and think about how we get them built and how we get them launched.
Cool. Calvin?
So the first I'll just reiterate is create the more effective cross-government management or approach to this, which is absolutely fundamental. And I do think it needs to be a national mission, and we can't abdicate leadership of the field to a number of the primes, and that's not doing down the primes. It's just there's a sense that like Airbus will look after itself and some of the other large companies will, but they won't, and we certainly won't be looking after like really innovative startups if we don't have that cross-government coordination. We need to develop a UK-EU space framework, and within that is understanding what those primes look like, and being able to accept that they are national flag carriers as well, and they're winners that we want to pick. because understanding sovereignty in space is critical, because there are parts which, like, we may have to abdicate, and there's parts that we should really protect. And we've got to be quite clear about those with limited resource, and like, it's sovereignty enough, and they don't have to be like all on the entirely on the fields of the UK for something to be sovereign, and that's quite important. So the framework with EU is really important, and then, like everything else, we need a industrial vision for space. We need to capture and understand, like, the size. Like, it's very rare that we talk about the size and the scope of the industry as a whole, and what the potential of having your own launch capability on the UK looks like in terms of really being able to transform the rest of the economy. And we need to do that to be able to understand what the potential is there within the UK. So we need to write that down, and we just haven't. There's an absence of it. There's some really light markers within the SDR and with the industrial strategy, but they're just not good enough. We need to be really out front. There are some capabilities we just need to say, we are going to do this, and then get on with it. And then the last one is, and I said, is like, if we want to protect our SMEs, then we've got to get on with some of the procurement reforms that are outlined in the SDR and the DIS, and that means, like, actually get on with them, because there's a lot of political leadership at the moment, and the politicians are pushing to do a whole load of stuff, and the organisation below them isn't necessarily moving at the same speed, and that means that whilst someone has shouted like hard left on the tiller is not being moved in the way that we would like to, and for SMEs, that is really, really impactful. So that those things we need to get after, I think, quickly.
Thank you, Kelvin. And Al?
Yeah, I think one really useful conversation. I think it's really good to get the reflections from an industrial perspective, this sort of grassroots feel. The best commanders make the most complex plans simple, and they do that by providing unity of effort. Like, just give us the central clarity and a single message when it comes to space. And if that hasn't come out in the SDR across government, and I think Calvin is absolutely right, it needs to have a cross-government pool, because there's so many different departments that benefit from an effective space and integrated and collaborative space industry. It probably needs to sit in the Cabinet Office to pull that together and really solidify what that means. So I think that's absolutely important. The second piece is the economic clarity. Has that been articulated into the system? I was just looking at some stats earlier. It's worth 18.9 billion to the UK economy at the moment, 52,000 jobs, and it's raising at 3.5% per annum. And that is a trajectory that is going to continue. When you add into that AI, quantum data, add in space, you can see actually in the future, probably incomprehensible how that's going to change everything from our day-to-day lives to global communications. And I think we've got to be part of that if we're going to squeeze every economic benefit out of space as we can, and indeed allow it to support our national security. So I think the cross-government approach to help cohere and deliver a comprehensive strategy, but really clear on the outcomes. And then I do think that, yes, there's a sovereign requirement, but we've also got to accept that we've got to work with our international partners and allies who have different capabilities and different levels of scale to help us get there.
Cool, thanks, Al. Final question for me before we go to audience Q&A. How does British sovereign capability protect, defend and benefit the UK national security? And Calvin, would you like to go first?
So we've kind of touched on the size and the extent of the UK economy's dependency on space. It's about 17% of the economy depends on our space industry, and actually it's probably a lot more than that if we do any kind of reasonable second order analysis of it. And that's kind of one of the issues at the moment, is that, like, we need to do that. We need to create that story and make that pitch to people that are completely unaware and allow themselves to walk past much of these capabilities. Like, the wonderful thing about Orbex being, like, having a sovereign capability is that really launch capability is that really means that we can transform how other UK SMEs that were reliant on scale up in the US or in Europe, but most notably in the US, to actually do it on our shores and not leave our shores. But we need to make sure then that we protect those companies and that we articulate that as those opportunities as well, because otherwise that undermines the business case and the case that we have for having a sovereign launch capability. And I think one of the big issues that we will face, because all of a sudden we're doing sovereign launch and we're going to be putting stuff up in space. There's some incredible companies that want to do certain types of recovery, and all of a sudden, because we've got this disparate system of regulation and governance and oversight, and when we were chatting earlier, I said, and who's doing all this for you? And he said, oh, it's the CAA, and I was like, oh, that's just doing one part of it, because the rest will come from a number of different other government departments. And it's only when we present those problems that we realise that the poison that we've created in the system because of the number of different interactions. So space is fundamental. We need to tell that story. We also need to show where the benefits come from some of the capabilities that are out there, because UK sovereign launch is going to be transformational for us.
Cool. Al, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think, sovereign capability from our perspective, I think is critical to our national defence and security. I would like to see a sovereign launch capability, and I know there's been proposals kicked around in the past. What I do think we need to go back to is having a really clear central vision. And a vision without a plan is a dream. We've got to properly plan it through and make sure we deliver it in conjunction with both the primes and of course the SMEs. And if you look at the SDR, whilst it may not be heavy on space, it is heavy on industry. And the reason it's heavy on industry is because we recognise that for SMEs to engage with defence is very, very difficult. And it talks to the Civilian Aviation Authority and the other rules and regulations we have in place. We have layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy that need to be cut away to speed up our innovative systems. And one of the ways we've got to do that is by getting after space. I'm a firm believer that in future, whether it's a geographically constrained conflict or indeed a larger one, the space is going to increasingly play a major role. And we've got to have a sovereign capability in that.
Cool. Oriel, would you like to go next?
Thank you. We think of sovereignty as twofold, I guess. It's, and national resilience for that matter. It's the freedom of action. And so not only does the UK rely on the military satellite communications that we provide, but 17 other NATO allies do as well, including the US. And there's clearly that really important bit of sovereignty and national resilience that is driven by that. But it's also about the know-how, the jobs, the growth and the ability of the people in the nation to come up with new ideas, to drive space contributions, maybe I put it that way. And again, as I said before, that there is a really strong story there. SpaceX apparently was entirely inspired by satellites. There is a room, I'm told, in the SpaceX that is named after Sir Martin Sweeting and the business that now we wholly own. And the other thing that I'd just like to speak about, and you talked a little bit about it, primes, and we've talked a lot about primes and smaller companies. For an ecosystem to thrive, particularly in a sector like space, you need a really rich interplay between a prime like Airbus. There's only one in the UK, 3,500 in space that we employ. The next company is 300 people. So there's a big gulf. Now, clearly, we might want to think a little bit about, is that the right thing? But that is the ecosystem that we have at the moment. And you need, I would argue, for an ecosystem to thrive, that kind of prime. And I think there's really good examples, if we look at civil, how the government can demand of a prime that you really pull through the supply chain. And we as a prime love the innovation that smaller companies bring. And one of the big contracts that we've recently won is for low Earth orbit SAR satellites, so radar, where you're getting very detailed pictures in all kinds of weather through clouds and everything. And that we've partnered with an SME called Oxford Space Systems for the antennae. These are the magic things that if you do the partnership well, you can grow the overall ecosystem. But it is important that you don't see the prime in conflict with the smaller companies and the innovation, but a sort of an innovator in its own right and also an an anchor for that growth in the long time, for resilience and for sovereign capability.
Thank you, Oriel. And last but not least, Phil.
Thanks, Liz. I mean, I would echo all the points that have been raised. I mean, 70% of GDP. I think the interesting thing is to think about the future. That number's only going one way. It came from zero. We are yet to see, the incredible boom that there may well be in space-based manufacturing, space-based solar power, and perhaps, already space is having a massive impact on the way conflicts are fought, the way drones are used in conflict. So this is going to be a huge part of any future economy, and also a very, very important pillar in any future defence strategy. So to not have a sovereign capability to get stuff into space, for me, would seem absolutely crazy. And particularly as that forms part of that big value chain of companies working together to deliver capability upstream, downstream. We source, the majority of our components in the UK with a big European supply chain, and we've built an entirely ITAR-free capability, so there's no US people working on there and no US componentry, so we have the rights to export this around the world, and I think this is a good thing for Europe to be collaborating on this, and hopefully will enable a good outcome in any future US EU negotiation, particularly around the EU regulation, for example, that stipulates that European payloads should be launched from European soil is up for renegotiation next year. Probably something we should be talking about.
Cool. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, everyone. I'm now going to open up for some audience questions. If you want to raise their hands, Tom will be coming around with a roving mic. Cool. I'll take them in threes. The gentleman on the third row.
Hi. I think it's really good to hear. Do you want to tell the same to my answers?
Oh yeah, but ideally, sorry.
Sorry, my name's Tom Paper. I'm a councillor in Stevenage, which Airbus Defence and Space is headquartered.
Indeed.
I just want to say it's really good to hear the Minister talk about cross-departmental collaboration, especially the stuff you're saying about the commissioning unit in the Cabinet Office. I think that's incredibly welcome development for the Minister to be saying that. I think my question is about skills as well. So obviously skills are a huge part of delivering sovereign space capability, and I guess the question is for the industry, how would you like the government to enable its skills agenda to serve what you need in order to build the satellites and the launch capability that you do, and for government what you see as the priority in the skills agenda to help enable that?
Cool, thank you. Next question. Cool. We'll take the gentleman in the second row there, and then the lady in the back there.
Thank you. Charlie Humphreys, Asia House. How do you see the struggle in space or in space technologies? Is it existential? Is there some game? So ultimately, US, China, the way things are looking on the surface of the planet? Or do you see a sort of more entrepreneurial focus? Can that be encouraged? Is it more stable with sort of small and medium-sized countries getting more involved, like UAE, South Korea, less sort of zero-sum and more stable? Or is that are they two sides of the coin?
Cool, thank you. And then Tom, the lady over there.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Alice Butt. I'm CEO of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers and President of the UK Space Trade Association. So thank you for the comments so far. Some really, really encouraging remarks that particularly resonate with the panel's observations around our need to make choices, our need to identify focus for our efforts in the UK, particularly when it comes to national capability. But we also heard sort of gaps in leadership. So this sounds like a trick question, but honestly, I'm really interested in the answer. To what extent do you think it is possible to deliver that focus whilst we have responsibilities for space spread across many different government departments? Or does it indeed require establishment of that single commissioning authority in somewhere like the Cabinet Office in order to deliver these priorities? And depending on the answer, what do we then need to do to bring that about?
Thank you very much. In terms of so the first question on skills, who would like to go first on it?
I can go on skills. And caveat my answer to sort of say on skills, of course, as a prime, you're in a privileged position. So our apprentices are very well known, our apprentice programmes across not only space but also aerospace. In total, we've got in the UK at the moment 700 apprentices. That includes all three divisions. And in space, we had 4,000 applicants for 36 places. So, very, very oversubscribed. And what we're doing now is trying to get those that maybe don't make it onto our scheme have the opportunity to go into the supply chain, because, of course, for smaller businesses, it's maybe more challenging to do the marketing when it comes to skills that we're able to do. I'd say, and again, to something that's difficult to address, we know that passion for things like space, but also the sciences, starts really young. And we know, for whatever reason, that there continues to be a really stubborn bias in schools on sciences. And so one of the things we need to just all collectively keep in mind is, how do you start from a very young age to enthuse people about space, but also the other advanced manufacturing and sort of sovereignty heavy sectors. And that is all the way through. And I have to admit, there is a bit of nervousness about me with skills going into DWP, because actually even in the Department of Education, we didn't find that sort of link to business that clear. And it's not, I mean, I can see why the government's done it, but this pull through from a young age to inspire children of all backgrounds and of all genders to really focus on these kinds of skills is really important. Sorry, that was a bit longer, maybe.
That's right. Does anyone else have anything to say on skills?
Yeah, I just came from an apprenticeship discussion just earlier. There's a piece here about communication and education, and I think there in the past has been some snobbery around apprenticeships versus degrees, and I would argue that the linked to your point about sort of getting people interested at a young age, between 16 and 19 years old when you leave school, there's a requirement to better communicate and educate the availability of opportunities to the youth of the nation. And I think one of those is space. It's one of many, AI and data and quantum, all the way through to more manual roles as well. For example, a prime example of that is the Army, Navy and Air Force. If you were to say to anybody in school between 16 and 19 what they would get from the Army, Navy and Air Force, they'll say you'll get marched up and down a drill square and they'll be doing press-ups and crawling around muddy fields. When the reality is, with the biggest apprenticeship givers, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force is fourth or fifth. Huge amount of opportunity, but we fail to communicate and sort of educate the youth of the nation on what's available. And so I think there is an active effort from both government and indeed industry, but also within the education system, to make sure that it's easily accessible for kids to see what opportunities there are. And that can be anything from space all the way through to becoming a plumber, a joiner, or manual labour role, which I just don't think is there at the moment.
It's
Both Al and I started our progress into the military very young, and but I had a sixth form scholarship at 15 or 16, which was a very small amount of money that allowed my parents allowed me to not have to worry so much about doing stuff while I was studying 16 to 18. And the preponderance of our entrance into defence used to be about 18, because it was seen a period of apprenticeship, and then you'd nurture and grow in the service in your early years and then professionalise later. And the system was kind of set up like that to support that entry, and that is so far away from the normal now. But in our understanding of an expectation of how people enter high-tech industries, and we need to address that. And that was in part in our industrial strategy submission, that it's pointless getting to presenting folks with options when they're 18, because they've already configured themselves both academically and mentally to do other things. So you've got to get to them earlier. We've got to have discussions and communications earlier. but also we've got to get into the places, like we've got to go to where the people are, not where we want them to be. I've got 2,800 needs in my constituency that if I go to any event, they're clamouring to get into high tech. Met 3 young women the other day. One wants to be a pilot in the air, wanted to be a pilot in the Air Force. One wants to be an engineer and couldn't work out how or where to do that at the moment. And the other one just said, I want to be in STEM. And I was like, this is incredible, but I don't necessarily know how to help these people. But I know queues of companies at the other end of the Elizabeth line that would get these people into employment and love to have them employment. So we've got to get over that. We've got to do that like yesterday, because we are failing these people. In terms of the answer to the question, I'm backbencher. No, like you need to centralise stuff. You need to have a visible leadership, and you need to pull things together to be able to address a big problem like this. It is not a leaderless exercise, which those that have ever seen on your team away day or type of thing that we do in the military, take the leader away and people just run around. Like you might get some reasonable results in some way, but you don't get a coherent answer. And that's the issue that we've got at the moment. And so we kind of need to get over that. But that's those 2 questions tackled. But there we go.
Cool. Phil, to us,
Should we move on to the US China? I mean, I don't think it will bifurcate into only opportunities in those 2 places. Honestly, I think there's a lot of really interesting work going on in many countries. I think that there's an incredible amount of heritage we have in the UK and Europe that we can build upon. A incredible amount of skills there, but there's also really interesting things going on in launching in Japan, in South Korea, in Australia, and it's become, with new manufacturing techniques, such as 3D printing is now cheaper and faster to make things. So I don't buy into this fact that the race is won and it's only SpaceX or the Chinese government. Not at all. I think there's loads of opportunity and we need to keep pushing.
cool. Yeah, quickly, does anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, just on the US-China piece, it's interesting to have a look at the statistics on who's done the most launches in the last 12, 24 months, 5 years. And that'll give you an indication of where the trend is heading. But I would say that, and I mean this genuinely, that some of the best innovation you'll get will be in Europe and the UK. And it actually gets picked up by other countries and then scaled. And so what we need to do is be far more effective with taking some of the innovation that we have and allowing people to scale here and scale properly, because it's too easy for other companies to come in, pick stuff up and put it away to bigger nation states that maybe have more resources in some cases.
Can I just say a word on this as well? I mean, of course, I work for a European business. you can guess what my answer is going to be, but I definitely agree with others. There is definitely a place for Europe in this debate. And just on military satellite communications, we think there's an export opportunity of 10 billion. Just to give you an example, just in that one category where there's opportunity, that's both in Europe, but it's also in the Middle East and it's also in Asia. There is a bit of work that we need to do, and to your point, there are some trade-offs, and where do we want to work together with Europe, and where do we want to work with others? But it has to be more than just that binary choice. I think that's our duty, but that's just me.
Okay. The final one we had was around, obviously, do we think it's possible across multiple departments? We have had some comments on this throughout the panel as well, but just quickly. Yeah.
I think what Colvin said earlier was an interesting one. Cross government, pull it into the centre, or just give someone the lead and the authority to hear everyone. And there's always this, and you'll see it. And one of the reasons why I'd argue there's layers and layers of bureaucracy, because over the last 14 years, you've seen government ministers change and change and change and change again, to the point of where the civil service looks up and they keep getting oscillated from far left to far right. And so, from my perspective, is if we want to lead in space, you have 2 real options. You pull it into the Cabinet Office in the centre to hear cross-government, cross-departmental priorities, or you turn around to a government department and say you are now the lead to cohere the rest of the departments. But it needs to be clear, and the vision needs to be absolutely written in black and white.
Okay. Anyone else have anything to comment on that?
I mean, I totally agree We have tried it before in the Cabinet Office. And I suppose the lacking ingredient for me was expertise of the sector and ability to deliver, in addition to your clarity of the vision. Those three things are quite difficult to pull through in Whitehall.
There's a Phil?
I mean, I think in our experience, DSIT has certainly not been doing a bad job in terms of civil space. A lot of experts, across DSIT and the UK Space Agency, it's going to be merged into one thing now. People say, is that a good or a bad thing? I think it's very, difficult to say till you've seen the result, but having one body, in charge of all civil space is probably not a bad idea. I think the missing pieces are where that brings in, space as it pertains to MOD and, other things where we don't necessarily have a person looking across that, which is thing where maybe Cabinet Office would be useful, but I mean, I'm not on the inside of the government, so hard to say.
Cool. You've already spoken on this, haven't you, Kevin? Cool. Right, okay, cool. We'll take one final round of questions if we can keep them nice, short and succinct. So for our panel members, cool. Can we have the lady at the front? The gentleman at the back. And then the person sitting next to them.
Roger, second COP delegate. And my perspective is obviously London and Suffolk country, but I wonder if you perceive, there was a lot of talk about the beginning of the talent pipeline, so schools, apprenticeships, but do you perceive a problem with the other end of the talent pipeline? I have multiple friends who moved to Southeast to sell ads on Facebook or stuff like that. So engineers, really good engineers, were eventually retrained and went to other commercial for salaries which are like 3 times higher than what lots of defense and space can offer. So is there systemic reasons for that, like for very suppressed salaries? Do you see it as a problem?
Cool.
Thank you. Sophie Antrobus, I'm Freeman Air and Space Institute at King's College London. I was going to ask actually something along this sort of academic pathway, but given you've been talking about Oriel pull-through skill, the pull-through from early ages and things, for Al, maybe specifically, Calvin might want to comment, might there be something there in rebranding the air cadets as aerospace cadets and increasing the way that we talk about space with that really growing environment? You'll know recently the project to train air cadets on drone flying. It's really interesting, and I just think maybe we're missing a trick if we don't consider that.
Yep.
Thanks, Evie. Hi, my name's Andy German. I'm a specialist space consultant for space professionals. Earlier in the year, there was some very well-received government announcements about uplifting defence spending. It's 2.5 and beyond. Great news, very well received by defence and space. The question I'm asked to keep as succinct is, where's the money? I'm not seeing any of it cascade down to programmes or R&D. What I'm hearing on grapevine is that there's no new money until 2030.
Cool, thank you. In terms of what I would say, Anne and Calvin's would have sort of
lump some of them together. So we used to be called Spaceys when we were kids.
I was going to say you
I think there's an important part actually in there's something quite important in what you say, because a lot of some of Al's great work in that role, in his role previously, to really shine light on the capability, the enabling capabilities that the air cadets give for young people is really quite incredible, and we need to make sure that we get that out there. And if you're not aware of it, go and have a look, because some of the stuff like being trained as drone operators is just incredible. Like, that is a employable skill almost immediately, and there's other skills that we could do in there. But I think that to make that really work, the Air Force actually has to properly own space and lead it properly. And so, there is a bit of a structural problem there. In terms of defence spending and the uplift, I think what's Actually, the really interesting part with defence spending is the 1.5%. Is the like what you do with because the 5% headmark ambition is 3.5 plus 1.5, and what we need to do is work out what the key enabling capabilities are for the UK to be more resilient and signpost and signal into that space, which will allow companies to commit to spending themselves. It's quite often the case that it's not necessarily that you need money. You just need the signalling and the intent to go with it. So I really think actually the area to be looking in for government that's really interesting is the 1.5%, and saying things like PNT is a national capability, like we're going to put it in there. We know the money's not necessarily coming, but this is where we're going to go, and this is how we're going to do it. Industry will fall in behind because all of a sudden Orbex will have a whole load of people offering creating stuff to then put into launch. Airbus will commit to larger programs and not moving things in the way that they might otherwise do. Like all of that will flow from it. So I don't think we should be over reliant on defence. We should be considering security and resilience in that regard.
Cool. Oriel, and do you want to lead on the in terms of talent pipeline issues with salaries, and obviously sort of also leads into the other question, where is the money?
Yeah. Well, I think this goes back, doesn't it, to my clarity, to my focus, and to my partnership. So I think I agree with Calvin. In terms of skills, I suppose I'd make a broader point here, and it goes back to where I started. It's about really fostering what we have, and really thinking about how we grow what we have. So we have three manufacturing sites in the UK, employed 3,500 people who are experts in space, right from the very beginning of their career. And the local MP down in Portsmouth with a colleague who'd been with Airbus for 40 years. So, that whole pull through and the capability that you get with a company that is the prime that's been here for a long time, and how you then grow, as I said before, with the SMEs that are there. And then it's Calvin's point that I think that the peculiarity about space is that it's quite expensive to get satellites up there. It's also quite hard. And then once you've got them up there, they stay up there for a while. LEO, obviously, the low Earth orbit comes, you've got a bit more flexibility there. But you need this mix of sectors, which goes back to this pull through. You need the military, and you need the military at the GEO, you need the military at the LEO, you need the civil at the LEO, then you need the institutional stuff, then you want to put a rover on Mars. You need that portfolio for business to come here to invest, to drive the skills and to pull everything through, and for it to thrive. And that, where I started here with this panel, in space in particular, that has to be a partnership between the government, because they are such a big buyer of space, and it's got to be business.
Cool. Phil, awesome.
I think on the skills piece, I think the inspiration is important. We were lucky enough to have Major Tim Peake come and chat to us the other day and spend 2 hours. That's not necessarily a scalable approach for every school in the United Kingdom, but maybe embedding him in the Air and Space Cadets would be. On the salary piece, I think, obviously AI jobs paying 400 million a year to individual programmers is already going to be better than the space industry. But I think most people, my reflection on, Orbex, we similarly have massive amount of demand for these internship positions. I think we did 7, this year we had 2,000 applicants. People work in the industry because it's just so inspirational, and it's just an amazing place to be, right? It's not all about the money, but the average salary, in our place is still 4 times higher than the local one, so it's not bad.
Cool, I'm finding it out.
Yeah, just a couple of points. Air and Space Cadets, I couldn't agree more. I've been to visit the Air Cadets. I went to their summer camp just a couple of weeks ago, and it was all about STEM. There was actually a space section where they were learning about space all the way through to sort of flying drones and fixing, airplane engines. It was really, really impressive. The most progressive of the cadet forces, I think, when it comes to that sort of higher end education. The statistics are absolutely fantastic. If anyone's interested, going to see the Northampton University report when it talks about social mobility, less likely to see a doctor for physical and mental issues, higher percentage of wage when they leave the cadets, you have more chance of staying at school and so on, and it just goes on and on. So, you know, if you have kids, get them into cadets would be my advice. Hence the reason why we increased the uplift to cadets by 30% just recently. It's a huge social mobility platform, something I'm really passionate about. At the school I went to, I definitely didn't have a cadet force. I think on the defence spending piece, you know, this is important. And there's something about when we think about defence spending, we immediately think of ships, planes, bullets and bombs. And it's something that we've become relatively obsessed with over 20 years of discretionary conflicts that we've been involved in. And we've got to think far more Cold War about institutional resilience. And importantly, whether we like it or not, whilst armies, navies and air forces may respond to crisis, industries, economies and societies win wars. And we've got to make sure that 1.5% and a bigger percentage drops into our industrial base, and that's dual use technologies, but also industrial capacity. And secondly, resilience within our population, which is equally as important. So I support Calvin's points, and I support big industry and small industries having the ability, seed corn capability to scale. And it's something we haven't focused on, but it's definitely part of the SDR and the DIS as it comes in.
Cool, thank you. We'll end the panel there. Adam is handing out copies of our glorious. Is that our defence? Yeah. Our glorious pamphlet, Defend or Depend, which features contributions from the good man to my right. It's got a lot of very good messages, and Adam will hand it out to everyone. There are also lots and lots of drinks, soft, alcoholic, water, juices. Are there canapes coming as well?
There are not.
No.
There are not, because it's not dinner time. They bought me no.
There was.
I think we'll bring that to a close.
Yeah.
But my name's Adam Walnuts, as I said. I'm the managing director of the UB Initiative. Lewis is our strategic advisor for technology, having been a software developer before actually going into politics and doing stuff, which is really exciting. We've done a pamphlet on quantum computing. We've done this glorious pamphlet on the defence industry and why we shouldn't sell everything to America. And there are pamphlets over there. There are pamphlets here to the left. Our next pamphlet we're going to be doing is on the space industry. And I know there's lots of people from the industry here. Please do take a card, get in touch with us as we build a group of people to contribute to what will be a significant piece of work. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.